So yeah, this session is looking at horticultural frontiers, which is a bit vague, which is why I sort of described what we're looking at. Particularly, we're looking at crops that show potential to be resilient and adaptive to, I think you're all aware, the fluctuating and increasing volatility of climate. So how do we deal with the increasing kind of heat waves or droughts? Both growers here today have experienced the high heats of this summer, and have their own sort of stories on to tell of that. So yeah, we give two speakers here today. We've got Elki and Mandy. Elki is going to kick off. He's from Mexico and has been living in the UK for the last 20 years and has been involved in the London Latin American gastronomic scene before going on to specialize in Mexican cuisine. Curious about his culture and heritage, a few years back he decided to follow his instinct and start on a journey of how cacti ended up in the Mediterranean, exploring its potential uses both present and future. He now grows in an unheated glasshouse at Wolves Lane Centre, London, and has ambitions to be the UK's first edible cactus farm. So thanks very much, Elki, for being here. If you haven't visited the Wolves Lane Centre in London, it's well worth a visit. And I have to confess that I went there originally to meet with some growers from Black Roots who sort of looking at exotic veg, or there's a whole growing space there, and that's really sort of what I went to visit. And then there was they said you must go and meet this guy who's growing cacti. And I thought, okay, yeah, that sounds, it wasn't on my radar. And I'm so pleased it did, because he's got so many interesting ideas, research, growing ideas. So I'm sure you'll get a flavor for that. And then we've got Mandy. Mandy Barber owns and manages a small business, an experimental growing space in Devon called Incredible Vegetables. A researcher of perennial edible plants, budding plant breeder and seed saver, Mandy runs a small permaculture plant nursery. She is passionate about researching sustainable food crops that have built-in resilience, as well as wild edibles that have the potential to become future staple foods. Incredible Vegetables aims to create a diverse reserve of useful perennial edible plants, as well as supplying perennial vegetables, seeds, and plants to small-scale growers and agroforestry projects. So welcome, Mandy. She'll follow on after Elki. We've already had a chat, obviously in the background online, and it's really interesting synergies and differences between these two kind of unlikely allies, I suppose. So I'd be really interested to hear your ideas as we go along. Do feel free to ask questions. If you do, just wait for me to get to you with a mic, so that the online people can hear the questions and say where you're from, your name and where you're from, so they get a picture of who's here. During Elki's presentation, we're likely to sort of have a bit of a stand up and gather over on one side around that table. So he's going to sort of introduce you to an actual plant, and just be wary of not getting in the way of the camera when we do that. And finally, just if you've got any ideas on, if you're a grower and you're looking to explore, or even a researcher looking at innovative ways of exploring plants or growing it, particularly in the horticultural sector, but not necessarily just there. We've got, you might be aware of the Innovative Farmers organization. We run Field Labs, which is a farmer-led organization, research project. So you can either just come and chat to me if you've got any ideas, or go online, innovativefarmers.org, and use the contact form there to become part of a kind of a database of ideas that we then search for people to be a part of. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Elki for our first talk. Thank you.
Okay. We have 25 minutes, something like that?
Yeah.
Righty. Well, welcome. My name is Elki. I'm just going to go through a little bit of, I'm not going to go more in like data, but I'm just going to show you a little bit of my journey with cactus for you to understand, because sometimes people try going into two technicalities, because it's a plant that is not often is not in the UK, is not present. But I'm just gonna show you my way, my journey, so you can understand a little bit more. Okay, next. Okay, so Nopali from the world Nahuatl, staple food from millennia. So in Mexico, there's many crops that have been used for millennia. Cactus is being used as a crop and also is being used in as a weed from the wild. If you know the Three Sisters, the Milpa system or Chinampa system, sometimes when these systems were not available on dry land, then cactus comes quite handy. One, because it's 90% water. It's quite easy to take from the environment just with knife. The whole plant, it can be used in many ways. So the whole trunk is fully edible. It can be given to animals. It can be eaten by humans. The fruit also is edible. The flower also is edible. It can be used in fibers, in biofuel, in water treatment, water management. It can be used in crops, in other crops, to help the roots of other plants. So through millennia, we have been using this plant. Is in our DNA, is in our flag, as you can see. So you can see a stone over there, which is a volcanic rock. In Mexico City, if somebody has been in Mexico City, there is surrounded by volcanoes. It's 2,000 meters above sea level. So all the Texcoco Lake, which is now called Mexico City, is surrounded by volcanic rock. Back in the day, before the Spanish arrived, the formations were not, it's not like just a plain environment. The formations used to go like for meters high, so you cannot crop in these places. So the people who used to live there used to go for pockets around the lake to start cropping. So these tribes used to fight for it. So there's another tribe coming from the north, go over there, says, well, can I just go in there? It says, sorry, mate, but the lake is busy. So you need to go further away and find your way. If you want to join us, you're more than welcome, but you need to crop somewhere else. So these people find that the only corners of this place that they could crop, they will full of volcanic rock. And they find out that in the volcanic rock, obviously, there's a plant that survives and thrives, which is the cactus, because it doesn't need soil, it doesn't need water, and it doesn't need a care from a human. And in the worst conditions, it can thrive. So here we can see in the national emblem, we can see the opuntias, Ficus opuntia indica, which is known as nopali, and so basically it's this one. And the fruit of the cactus you're popping out. So in all is tenok, then the fruit of the cactus is nochtli, and the place of is tlan. Tenok, nochtli, tlan. So this is Mexico City. So for us, it's quite important, Mexicans. It's on our DNA, it's in our gastronomy. Is everywhere we go, you'll find a vendor in the street, in the supermarket. You can get online here in England. Obviously, I don't think it's organic. to be honest, and the flavors and all the nutrients are taken out. I just don't want to. How the cactus arrived to Europe. So when the Spanish arrived to Mexico, or what it was called the Anahuac, they discovered that it was full of gold, silver, and grana, and they wanted to take these products back. But obviously the ships were loaded, and in order to take more weight, they needed to find different ways to load the ships. One of them, it was get rid of the containers of water, the barrels, because it's extra weight. The other one is bring plants that could survive the transatlantic journey. So they used to do at the bottom of the ships, cactus, fruit and vegetables, then cactus. So they created a refrigeration system in the ships. So they eat the fruits, the vegetables, to avoid the scurvy, but then they go for the fruits and the cactus itself. So they will last for longer in the sea. Then if you wanted to cook during your journey to eat animals, obviously, if you don't bring animals to the ship, you still can survive the transatlantic journey, and you don't have to use wood to burn, and is extra weight less of water or supplies, and instead you bring more gold, silver, and grana. So why grana? Grana is cochineal. Is basically as an insect that attaches to the nopali, to a few varieties, not all of them, and it starts sucking the sap, the inside of the plant, the water. And from that animal, the belly of the female, especially the female, when you dry it on the sun, then you have little balls, and those balls are grana cochineal, which is a very strong pigment. When that arrived to Europe, they will say, okay, we want this pigment in great quantities, because otherwise we're going to have to ship it or bring it from Asia. So they saw the opportunity to start bringing more grana from the American continent until they decide, okay, the people from the Americas, they cannot produce as much as we want because they don't get paid. So they start bringing these plantations to islands in the Mediterranean. Why islands? So they could have control by ships of their plantations. So this is grana cochineal. So basically, and it's also edible. It doesn't have a taste. It's not vegan for those, so if you are allergic, is somebody here allergic to cactus? Do you know? No? Well, the ladies might not be, because the pigment that many lipsticks or the companies is coming from cochineal. You can find it in some supermarkets. Just go 120 II or 110 Ti, depending on the process of the cochineal. So that's how we ended up in the Mediterranean, this plant. Next one. So here it looks like a really bad stage. It's just because the plant is being eaten by cochineal, because there are no controls in the Mediterranean, because there is no an insect that can eat or consume the cochineal. The only way it was controlled was by taking the cochineal out of the cactus, cleaning the cactus in a productive way. So you can see here the cochineal has finished with one plant, but still they're so resilient, they keep energy, and as soon as they have a chance, they just go up again. So the problem with cochineal around the Mediterranean is quite big, just because there is no knowledge on how to deal with the cochineal. This is a plantation in Portugal. You can see there's a lot of fruits over there. So the fruit can give you, apart from fruit, juices. You can make liqueurs, any type of sugars. So how they develop the fruit? Basically, once you put cactus under stress on the few long periods of time on drought, they release a lot of sugars, like we were talking about apple trees, that they feel under stress and they produce a lot. So to give seeds in order to preserve the species. So Portugal, Italy, Morocco, Turkey, they produce a lot. Italy is the second producer behind Mexico worldwide. Okay, a multi-use plant over here. I'm doing colonche, which is a pre-Hispanic drink, alcohol, about 7–8%. Then over here, you can see in dry land, just chopped cactus given into cows to livestock. It can be given to any other livestock. You will see, well, what about the spines? Well, choose a species without spines and you are sorted. Then mucilage. So inside of the plant, like the gooey thing, people will say, the mucilage. This is where the key part or the key ingredient of the cactus, because it's complex sugars in the form ribbons. So I will show you in a bit. So this mucilage, if you extract the mucilage, you can drink the mucilage, it will clean your gut. So it's good for giving to animals, livestock. Farmers used to put a lot of cactus in the floor, in the soil, for the livestock to come in. So the mucilage goes into the legs of the livestock and will clean the legs, and the parasites will be a bit less of a danger in livestock. Also, mucilage was used especially when in rainy seasons in Mexico, in the big slopes of the mountains. All the water was coming and getting mixed with soil, so very difficult to use that water for human consumption. So what they used to do, they used to get tanks, form tanks, cook a lot of cactus, like I showed in there, and then add it into the water. 2–3 days later, the colloidal matter will sink or start gathering at the bottom of the container. So it was a way to clarify water, not purify, clarify water for human consumption. There's a few studies now on how to purify water in order to avoid aluminum sulfate, like the thing that you put in your pools to clarify the water. And also is drinkable and is fully compostable. Also, bioconstruction, the mucilage can be used for making bricks. So you mix the mucilage extracted with clay and other materials, and instead of using just water, you use water with mucilage. Your brick will be more flexible for those places in seismic areas. It will have a compound of like a Gore-Tex, so it's fully breathable, but the water can come in and the temperatures will be regulated from day and night. Let me see. So here is Wolves Lane. Over there in that picture is just a section. On the middle picture is part of the nursery where I'm doing my experiments. Sometimes they are full of water, and then I go into others containers which I haven't seen or filled water for months. So like this one, this fruit has been detached from soil or any water for nearly 3 or 4 months, and it started giving a root, for example. And I have other fruits that already give another fruit on top of the fruit, and it's flowering, so which is quite amazing. So why cactus in London? I said, well, why not? This is the interesting thing. 2 years ago, I was taking pictures as a part of just have a record of the plants. And on 14th of January, last winter, I realized that there was growth on the arrows of the plant where they breed. And I was like, okay, so quite cold today. It's been cold for the last 2 weeks, average 0 to 1 degree. There is not much light, and there's a sign of growth. What happened is that there was some gaps of sun coming through the glass houses. So it was waking up the cactus and it was quite cold. So I thought that the cold, it was gonna stop the growth of cacti, but actually didn't. So I started doing more research on these specific plants, and I realized that is coming from South America, 6,000 kilometers south of the equator, which is in London, I think we are 6,000, 6,100. Down in the south, they have the Pacific, the Atlantic, and the Antarctic. Here we have the Atlantic, the North Sea, which is very similar climate. So basically the cactus, they are just right upside down. And this is following the moon cycles. This is a harvest made three months ago, which I use to go into the nursery again, and also to do demonstrations and cook-offs and supper clubs over there in Wolves Lane. So the more I put in the soil, obviously for next year, it will be more. People sometimes ask me how I make them grow if I don't have all the equipment that requires lamps and heaters and moisturizers and all that tech is we don't have that tech. It is what it is. It's a glass house made in the 70s. It just only have flaps to control the air in and out, and that's it. It's facing south, which is quite helpful. But the only thing is I try to keep them as if they were as close to Mexico. So try to clear out the paths for the sun to come in, and so far is working. Right, so this is actually one of these plants. So we start from these are quite small, possibly like this, young cladodes. Then with a knife, I just take it off, and it's just ready to eat, which is what I'm doing now in a bit. That's why I'm asking if you are allergic to cactus. Yeah, as a food safety, I need to ask. If you are allergic, then don't eat. But if you are not allergic, then let's do it. So the only thing that stops people from eating cactus is the spines, really. After you remove the spines, you can eat it raw, you can eat it cooked in the fire, you can boil it, you can preserve it, you can do whatever you want. You can give it to the animals, you can leave it like these plants, as I said, 3 or 4 months without water. This one as well is being out of the soil, just in a table, and still alive. And if I put it in the soil, for sure you start rooting. As you can see, the arrows start becoming roots, like this one. There's a root over there. Every time, nearly there. So part of my heritage, my grandmother, who took me to the kitchen, took me to the garden. Then we moved to the city. People thought she was a bit off by her age. And that's when she started dedicating to her garden, like she was doing in the village with her sister. So she told me, you need to sing to plants, you need to talk to plants, and you need to create an energy in the garden, because this is a key ingredient on how you're going to live with plants. Which I couldn't understand, but now that I'm working in the garden, for me is a key. So I try to bring musicians to play for the plants on a private, on open concerts. All sorts of musicians. It's all about creativity and interaction with the plants. So I really, if you have a garden or a field, bring music into the plants. It will change. You will see a drastic change, not only in your plants but in yourself. So we have 5 minutes. I'm gonna go to that table, and then let me see. One more I have. No. End of slides. Yeah. So that's it. Okay. So I'm gonna move to that table.
All right. Yes. I'm just come sit. You already got. Yeah. No questions. It's fine. Yes.
Now, why cactus in the UK? Well, as you can see, this year good temperature. People are trouble the temperatures. My cactus, the ones for the community space, instead of suffering, went into stress and started giving flowers like never before. And the growth rate, it was like I've never seen cactus grow in the UK. So the more light, as you can see, there's more sun. It might be a bit colder than today, but there's going to be less cloud because like 20 years ago, the patterns were completely different than today. So these plants, we will have more development when there is sun. They can hold onto high temperatures. I crossed 56 degrees in the greenhouse for a few days, but I also have gone below 0 for weeks in winter. And that's because the greenhouse where they live is, if it's hot, it gets a lot hotter. If it's cold, it's a lot colder. So it's a greenhouse effect. We know that. So, anyone? So, okay. Yeah. Don't worry, by the time you are in the station, you'll still be fine. Yeah.
What doesn't kill you before it's 48 hours.
In the greenhouse, there's no frost, but it's really cold. It can go -2, -3, -5, which was the record. So what they do, as soon as they start continuous freezing temperature, then they close the cells. There's no exchange of nutrients between the inside of the cell and outside of the cell. They just go to sleep. But at least sun, they will wake up. They will not fall asleep, even though that is frozen temperatures. Not in all species, but in this one specifically. There is one experiment in Glasgow with the Rush House garden. If somebody has heard about that garden, there is cactus inside of the polytunnel and outside. So far, the ones inside of the polytunnel with no water, they start growing, and the ones outside, they just holding on because of the rain. So I told them not to touch the plants, not to water the plants, not to do nothing with them. Just once in a while, maybe play guitar or sing to them, because I never was. Yeah. The thing is, if you water them, they might feel like, okay, there's nothing to do. I don't release sugars. I just stay as I am because I don't feel on the trip. So if they're not giving water, then obviously they were like, okay, now it's time to work. This is what we're made of, to be resilient. From the air, from the atmosphere, and they breathe from the eye rolls, the ones that I'm cutting now. That's where the spikes, the spikes are coming from, and that's the entry and exit of the plant, because it's a can plant. So during the exchange of carbon, that's where it's happening. Okay, so this one is ready. So the people who ate still alive? Yeah, okay. Are you sure? Some other questions that people ask me is that if I grow peyote or San Pedro, I have the knowledge, but this is not my point. So no hallucinogenics. So this is only for a plan for the future, not just to go up and get high or something like that. It depends. So when I'm in south of Spain or in Morocco or places where it's quite hot, I really like this. So no cooking. 40 degrees over there is quite refreshing. Yeah, so I prefer like this. But also on the fire, just put one cladot and burn the spines and ready to go.
You know what the nutritional value composition is?
It depends on the species. There's about 300, 150 endemic from Mexico. It depends on the soil. They like eroded or poor soils, but they get a lot of minerals. So calcium, magnesium, quite good on that. Not much protein, is maybe from 3 to 6%, depending on the variety, but it contains 90% water. So basically, you're looking at water container painted in green. Yeah, ready to be taken. So yeah, that's 2 more. Yeah, I'll just shift it. So I think that's it, really. Go to questions.
I think
Yeah.
we will. I really hope to get to some questions.
Okay.
But let's move on to Mandy.
Mandy,
to
yeah,
make sure she's
sorry.
got her time.
Yeah, okay.
Just because we're delayed starting, and then
Yeah.
hopefully get in some questions at the end.
Okay.
So thank you very much,
All right,
Elki.
thank you.
Yeah.
Cheers.
About, or maybe we can get it to a 1:15. Yeah, just yeah, because it's just yeah. Session. It will just change.
All right, okay. What I do, that's the emails online. We've just, I think you follow the links and yeah, so online attendees.
Step back out of there if I want to do. Right, and then I can scroll.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh. Oh.
Okay. So, okay. Thanks, everybody. I feel really inspired hearing about the cactus, and I want to start the Devon branch of the cactus farm. So my name is Mandy Barber. I run Incredible Vegetables, which is a experimental growing space and plant nursery. I've got 2 sites within 3 miles of each other in Devon, and I really want to share with you some of the more useful crops in terms of like a market garden. So I've picked mostly leafy greens, but if we've got time, I'm going to have to speak really quickly. I want to also show you some perennial salad leaves and some perennial broccoli alternatives as well. So just really quickly, just to show you the space, and also an outdoor space which has I've been working with for about 12 years, which has lots of mature perennial edible specimens. It's kind of a wild space for perennials where I've been trying them out and testing them and eating them and growing them for 12 years. So I've had a lot of observations of a lot of changes that we've gone through: extreme heat, extreme cold, extreme wet in that time. So I just wanted to quickly just show you the space I'm growing in. It's got a bit more unruly of late. And today's talk really is, I've got a lot of beautiful images to show you of resilient perennial vegetable plants. But just really quickly, just some of the advantages of perennial vegetables are that we don't have to till the soil once they're planted. They have ability to lock up carbon in the way that annual vegetables can't through their biomass and their really extensive root systems. Great pest resistance. All of my perennial vegetables grown outside, none of them have ever had any irrigation. They only survive with whatever rain comes. They've had no irrigation. They rarely have any inputs, maybe a multi-compost now and again. And so they're kind of very minimal, low maintenance crops. And quite often they're at their best in the spring when we need crops to harvest before we've even sown our annual crops. And the other thing to consider is about the areas that they might grow. Like we wouldn't plant annual vegetables in kind of boggy areas or shady areas or marginal scruffy areas. So that's where perennials can really come into their own, where they can inhabit those spaces quite a lot. Quite a lot of the time they're woodland plants or kind of semi-shade plants. So if you've got a space, you maybe have areas in there that you could utilize for perennial vegetables that you're not currently utilizing. And some of the disadvantages, although I don't like to talk about the disadvantages, are sometimes they can take quite a long time to fruition. So you may have to wait maybe 3 years for some crops before they really start producing, but then you've got 10, 20, 50 years, maybe hundreds of years in the case of some perennial crops. And a discussion we were having in the car on the way here is like, how do we access the plants? You know, how would we scale this up? And then what would that look like? And how would we do this? Because this really is a horticultural frontier in terms of perennial vegetables, because there's so much more research that needs to be done, but the time is now for us to all really look into this. It's never been a more important time to start adopting some of these crops. Sorry. So I've got some sections, I've got way too many sections to tell you to talk about, but I'm going to concentrate on the leafy greens, and then there's perennial legumes, perennial broccoli alternatives, and some perennial salad leaves, if we can squeeze those in at the end. Some of these you might be familiar with, but one of the most asked about perennial vegetables and the most requested plant of all time in Great Britain is the perennial kale. This got a mention in The Guardian a couple of weeks ago, and my website crashed for 2 days because there are like 5 million people trying to buy perennial kales all at the same time. And I don't know if you've come across this Taunton Dean variety, which is probably the most well-known variety. It's very resilient. It can produce for up to about 8 to 10 years. The first 5 years are the most productive, but I've got plants now that are reaching their 11th, 12th year. And although it has a very woody structure, the leaves are surprisingly tender and can be harvested for most of the year, apart from really at the height of summer, when they kind of lose a bit of their freshness, but the rest of the year. So I'm just about to start a big trial at Badderford Farm, where I work, where we're going to actually try and scale up the perennial kale production in terms of trying it out in veg boxes. So I'll go back to the propagation in a minute. So this is the first of the trial plants, but we're actually planning on doing a whole field scale trial next year, just to see how they can be harvested, you know, how the customers like them, and all that kind of thing. So they're really resilient. They don't require any irrigation. They do get pests the same as other brassicas, but because of their size and their longevity, they shrug off the pests. So they're able to deal with caterpillar damage and whitefly and things like that. And by the autumn and winter, with the onset of moisture, they have a whole flush of green leaves again. So a couple of other varieties I grow are Dorbenton kale, not as productive as the Taunton Dean, but still useful perennial kales. I'm just going to flick through these. And the magical thing about these plants is that, and a lot of the perennial vegetables, they're very, very old vegetables. It's just that we've lost the use of them. So it's kind of like old wave perennial vegetables that really need to make a renaissance. And then there's also a whole new wave of perennial vegetables. For example, a lot of plants from Japan and Korea, which can also be really useful edible plants as well. And I also grow purple tree collards, which is a bit more of an elusive perennial brassica. But I want to show you the best perennial kale that I grow, which is actually, this is the love child of the purple tree collard and the Dorbenton kale. And this is also going to go into the perennial kale field trials at Badford as well. So it's this one's a bit more of a compact specimen. And this is the most resilient in terms of pests. It doesn't suffer any caterpillar damage, and it just grows for it's never flowers, and it's been growing for about 10 years on my site, and it's not showing any signs of giving up anytime soon. And that's through drought, heat, extreme rain, and everything. And that's propagated exactly the same way as with stem cuttings. They truly are like magnificent vegetables. Even if you don't grow any other of the perennials, I really recommend these for like a continuous supply of leafy greens without any kind of inputs whatsoever. Okay, I'm going to move on to it. I know I've only got like 15-20 minutes, so I'm going to move on to some other crops that have taken the world of perennial vegetables by storm. And this is Herblitzia temnoides, which interestingly enough is actually being adopted by commercial growers in the US. It's becoming actually a really valuable early hungry gap crop. And basically it's a climbing spinach. It's a herbaceous perennial. It goes from ground level to about 3 meters over the course of spring and early summer. And the leaves can be used exactly just like spinach. But in the States, they harvest the first shoots, which can be harvested as a vegetable in their own right. But the most interesting part of this crop is that it likes semi-shade, so it will grow in a moist, damp spot where you can't cultivate other crops. And again, I've never irrigated any of my plants, and they can provide spinach-like leaves right early on from the first shoots in kind of February, March, right through to about June, July, and then they start to flower. You can see they produce some pretty impressive vines. This is actually grown as an ornamental plant for quite a long time, but in Scandinavia, it's been used as an edible plant for many, many years, and it's only really taken hold in the UK recently with its own Facebook page. It's become like an internet sensation in its own right, this plant. But as you can see, the leaves can just be utilized exactly in the same way as spinach. They taste very spinach-like. They could actually be a really useful perennial salad crop, because you could pick the young leaves and put into salad bags, but you could also wilt them down and use them as a wilted spinach leaf as well. They are hardy down to -25, so they have quite a lot of resilience in terms of temperature. And another one of the kind of old wave perennial vegetables is also Good King Henry, which again, it's like a vegetable green that was used, really commonly used, even within living history. It was a plant that would be at the end of the garden. And I've even had people talking to me when I give talks about their nan having Good King Henry quiche and things like that. But a lot of these plants have such wider benefit other than food for human consumption. They actually have benefit for, this is like host to think about 4 different moth species. So when we're planting these foods for our own consumption, we're also benefiting way more than just, you know, food security. We're benefiting the soil, but we're also benefiting all the creatures that can inhabit those plants or use them as a food source. So this one is definitely worth a look at. And also, it can be used as a perennial grain. There's some people in America that have been processing the seeds it could be used actually as a perennial quinoa alternative. So with a bit of processing, it's quite a laborious process, but you can actually get like a black quinoa grain from the seed heads, which I think is exciting, like having a leaf crop and a grain crop in the same plant. And sea beet is another one that I grow, which is a sort of common coastal plant. But it's really interesting when you investigate these plants. So this is the common wild ancestor of all the rainbow chards and the perpetual spinaches and the beetroots that we eat today. They all originate from these wild species, and this is why they have so much resilience, because they haven't really changed from their original wild place on the coast or on cliff tops. So and when you're trying to introduce perennial vegetables as a whole new, for example, if you're trying to introduce them to customers, it's really good to start with things that are like for like substitutions. So with leafy greens, it's like a really good place to start with things that could be familiar. So sea beet could be used as an alternative to chard, but grown in a perennial way. And this is one of the so-called new wave perennial vegetables, which I'm growing, which is a Korean flowering plant. But in Korea, it's actually cultivated on a mass scale. It's actually a really fragrant edible leaf. So I'm working to produce plants and seeds of this crop, but it also has the added benefit of being really amazing for pollinators as well. And this one's it's a very traditional spring green. It's a spring and autumn green, and it's actually a traditional Cherokee wild green. It grows all across America, but it's one that's in the world of perennial vegetable circles that I belong to. It's actually another plant that has multiple purposes, like flowers for insect life, spring greens for us to harvest, and it's the only edible rudbeckia out of the rudbeckia species. And in my last 10 minutes, this is another plant which organic growers in Maine, in the US, have started to adopt this crop as a useful commercial crop. So it's not much is known about this genus of plants, but it's actually a plant that is somewhere between a cross between a lovage and a celery sort of flavor. It has complete hardiness. It's these are in the tunnel because I'm producing seeds, but it has hardiness down to about -45. It will produce right through the winter. It will produce through snow. The green shoots will still come up in really extreme conditions, and it grows about 6 foot tall. And you can harvest the leaves and stems and use them as a celery substitute. And patient stock is another plant that sort of fell out of favor in about the 1750s or something, but weirdly in Europe, especially in Southern Europe, this is still commonly used as a vegetable. It's stuffed like the same way as you use a cabbage leaf. And it's really packed with nutrients, and it's another plant that we could maybe readopt back into our diets. I know most of us spend our time trying to dig docks out of our fields and gardens. They're going, yay, plant more docks. But this is actually got a much quite a nice taste, something similar to a sorrel. But again, another completely resilient. We know that we don't have to water or irrigate or tend to docks. They can look after themselves. So this is actually a really useful perennial vegetable. Most of these are really underutilized, and we kind of really need to give them a second look and go, how could we utilize these plants? I had to put this one in because I grow this plant, Udo, but when I was researching it, I found out there are actually like underground Udo farms in Tokyo, which I didn't know anything about, but it's a 3 meter tall perennial vegetable. I think it's one of the taller. It's a herbaceous perennial, so it goes from nothing to spring to 3 meters when it's over the course of the summer. So the stems are peeled and lightly cooked and put with a dressing. So I haven't got my own Udo mine, but I have got it growing outside where I put buckets over the stems to blanch them, a bit like you'd force rhubarb or something like that. Maybe we can have a cactus farm above and an Udo farm below. Oh, quickly. Well, I've got 2 minutes on perennial legumes, really quickly. So I'm working with this crop, Apios americana, and I'm working with the University of Aberdeen, and it's a really important perennial legume. The main part that is harvested are these are the tubers, and in the quest for sort of sources of perennial vegetable protein, these come really high up. They're about something like 17% protein, and they're full of amino acids. The University of Aberdeen have done a full nutritional profile on them, and it's not just the tubers that are important for human consumption, but the foliage is also completely packed with nutrients and fiber and protein, and they're looking at it as potentially as an animal fodder crop, so it could actually be used something that spans human, like you were saying, like feeding the cactus to the livestock. This actually has so many avenues of potential. So they're trialing it up in Scotland, and I'm trialing it down in Devon. So the tubers are really tasty. They taste like quite a nice bag of chips when they're fried up. And I've been trying to work with 40 varieties, just trying and testing them all out in my field, and also at the tunnel in Badderford, a crazy experiment, like trying to look after 40 different types to see which produce the best.
There's a shade. Is that a shade at all?
What? Sorry,
It's a shade.
I have got some shade at the end, yeah, where the nursery plants are, and you can see the flowers there. And the second legume, very quick whistle stop tour on this one, but this is really with the summer that we've just had and the issues with watering plants. This is actually a tropical legume. It's a perennial that grows for about 5 years, but it is a frost tender perennial. So, but I've been working with this crop to try and see if I can overwinter them. But the plants I had growing outside had no watering over the entire summer and have still flowered and gone on to produce pods. So it has two uses. You can use it as a fresh green pea, or you can use it as a dried pea. In India, it's used as per tur dal in India. So it has potential, possibly as an annual crop for fresh peas without irrigation, and possibly as a perennial crop to make our own dal from, if I can get that far. But okay, I'm going to whiz through the onions, and then I might have to stop at the perennial onions. Come back next year for the other half of the talk. So perennial leeks, although they take time to establish, they really are worth the investment. They can take 2 or 3 years to really get into their cycle. But this is a French perennial leek that I grow, which really grows probably to about 2/3 of the size of a standard garden leek. And the way that they're harvested is by harvesting them at ground level, and then the bulb will go dormant over summer and then pop back up again. They're just starting to re-emerge again this time of year. So from a planting, over time, you can have a harvest of leeks every year from the same bulbs, which is a really useful thing. And to propagate them, they flower, but instead of making seeds, they actually produce heads of bulbules. So if you were going to grow these on any great scale, the first few years I would use as propagating material to get as many heads of bulbules as you can, and that will give you literally hundreds and hundreds of bulbules to work with that you could then continue to plant out. So I would use them that way to really build up your stocks, and then start harvesting after that. And a Babington leek, which is the more common one. And you can see what goes on under the ground. They actually produce above ground with their aerial bulbules, but they also produce below ground with their little side offsets. And I think I'm going to finish on this slide, although I'd love to tell you about the broccolis and the salad leaves. We'll have to save that for another time. But this is actually another really old-fashioned onion called an everlasting onion, and it's one again like the perennial kales and the good King Henrys. This would have been at the bottom of people's gardens as a kind of staple food. You know, I always feel like if you've got perennial greens, perennial onions, some perennial leeks, your whatever happens in the world, your dinner is like on the table. And this is how I like to think about these crops, that it's kind of having that sort of built-in resilience, and the foodstuffs which don't need any care or attention are kind of really resilient and can like play such a massive part in nutrition and food security, as well as all the other benefits that go with them. So this is multiplying them up. They're really hardy. They grow outside. But basically with these, you plant one bulb, it will divide into two, and those two divide into two, and you end up with a clump of about 15 to 20 onions. So you can use them as a perpetual spring onion, or you can lift the whole clump and divide and replant. So very quickly, over the space of a year, you can multiply an onion stock, and they never flower. They don't need any irrigation outside, and they're kind of hardy and very pest resistant as well. So I think they're actually another one that we're going to consider at the field scale sort of trials to see how we could work them on a bigger scale. Okay, have I got time for a quick broccoli, or do we have to pack up there?
So yeah, it seems very unkind to draw this to a close. Let's just sort of check in. So are there any questions? We've got 15 minutes and we do have to finish.
Right. Okay, we should have questions then, really, I think.
Yeah, but if there aren't any, then you know, we can carry on. I don't
yeah,
think
plus
there are any none on the chat online, but a few in here. So let's do a few questions, and then that could be Mandy or Elki. And if there's time, then
do you want me to come and sit?
Yeah.
Hi, thank you both for that. That was amazing. I just wanted to ask, with perennial crops, how you find the nutrient loss over time, and if you add many inputs into it, because with annuals we're like constantly adding compost and stuff like that to the beds, but is it something you don't find you need to do at all?
Most of the perennials I've been growing in the last 10 years really haven't had any inputs at all, apart from maybe the perennial leeks get like a dressing with compost once a year. That sort of helps keep the soil a bit moist around them. But the leafy greens, I haven't given them anything at all. I think they sort of put down such deep root systems that they tend to find their own nutrients and moisture. I've never really had to step in with any of them to give them any additional supplements or anything.
Hi, with growing the sort of perennial kales and brassicas and things, do you find there's any problem with pest and disease carryover with things growing there constantly the whole time?
Yeah, I do get asked that quite a lot. I've never had problems with clog grooves or anything. With some of them have been on my side for more than 10 years. The issues that they do have are sort of build up of aphids sometimes and white fly, that they can be pruned back
and that will encourage, new growth. So it's not like they're not immune. I mean, they will carry all the same pests as the other brassicas, but generally they can bounce back from quite extreme damage. If you can get them through their first year, when they're a little bit vulnerable in their first year, they will get slug attacked and damaged. But once you get them to the, sort of a couple of 2 or 3 feet tall, then I found that they can withstand quite extreme damage. And then by the winter, it's like no damage has ever occurred to them. They've kind of completely recovered. So.
It's just my observation that a pigeon can't fly and eat at the same time, so it's quite good once they reach a certain height.
They do like to land on the top of them, but they don't get the sides and the bottom. They just get the top leaves. So.
With the spring onions, the perennial spring onions, do you just cut them off to harvest them, or do you have to pull them up?
You can just cut them off.
Just cut them off as a crop.
Yeah.
Okay. And I assume they'd shrink up, like if you had a spring onion, you couldn't sell it. Do you think you'd be able to sell that in a bunch like a spring onion?
I think the thing is, like, these are the things that need to be tested, like the longevity after harvest, and maybe with those it might be better to split bunches and sell it with the with the bulbous part as well, and then replant. It's because I've only been using them on a small scale and not for like veg boxes or anything. That's something that would have to be tested, like do they wilt immediately from harvest if you were just going to sell them as bunches of greens, for example. But there is scope for like pulling some of the whole plants and keeping some intact in the ground and lifting bunches that way. They would last a lot longer if they had their bottom part.
I grew some. We let our leeks flower this year. They were in the late planting bed and undersown, and all the leeks flowered. And then we mowed them off and tarped, and we've now got, I don't know, spinach growing there. And there's when we were planting, I noticed some small bulbils, and now we've got, which is lovely, I'm not complaining, we've got lots of leeks coming up. Are they doing the same thing as your perennial leek? Without those leek plants, had they produced bulbils at the root?
I think leeks, given the chance, like show their perennial ancestry, because the leeks that we grow, the common leeks that we grow, are all related to the wild ancestors that I was showing you. So some of them have the ability to revert back to. I think they really secretly just want to go back to their perennial, the perennial roots, if you like. So they do. Some of them do that, and same with garlic. You can like keep harvesting the garlic greens and keep the bulb in the ground as well.
I've got another question. This is kind of for both of you, about whether you've bring in any non-native varieties and if you've experimented with that, and with the cactus, if you ever have any problems with them being non-native, with like invasive species of pests, and also the biological controls of the pests, like whether that's something you have to think about.
Well, there's many species that are not native to the UK that also come from Americas. All the potatoes, tomatoes, pumpkins, they are native from whether North America or Mesoamerica, Latin, or even South. So the only thing is, yes, there are pests that might come and get it as a natural, sometimes rodents that might want to chew on a vegetable or a cactus, or on a spineless cactus, because that's the point of having the spines. Cochineal, but obviously there's no cochineal here, unless I will introduce it, but it will be only for research. And then fungi, when I do the cuts, and just need to be careful I use ash to heal all my cuts on the cacti. But apart from that, there's nothing else. I haven't tested on a bigger scale on the open, only a few plants, but it's only the frost, that continuous frost, that might kill the cactus. And as I say, in Glasgow, they live within other crops in this little garden, and so far they're fine.
I think in the world of perennials, it's such a small group of us doing it. So finding plants and seeds usually comes through exchange from, or like there are tried and trusted sort of agroforestry suppliers in the UK. And then before Brexit, I was able to grow a lot of stuff from seed, you know, that I could easily buy from. There's such amazing agroforestry projects in Europe. So of course that's become much more difficult now. So I kind of have relying on other people doing the same thing for us to exchange things within the country. And a lot of agroforestry plants are non-native, but obviously you have to be aware that you're not going to introduce something that would upset the local ecology, or so you just have to be really aware of that and really research the plants very well.
I'd be delighted if you could tell me how to get good King Henry to germinate, because I've tried 2 or 3 years running and I get nothing. I leave it outside in the cold. I've tried all sorts of things.
Well, first I'll send you some seed, because I've just harvested several kilos of good King Henry seed, and we've just germination tested it, and it's germinating brilliantly. But the trick is to sow it as freshly as possible, in my experience, and to sow it once you've got a plant growing, you've made it, because you can collect the seed straight off the plant and chuck it straight into a seed tray the moment it's ripe, and then let it germinate over the autumn and winter. That's the best way to do it. And with seed that's been dried for a long time, it really doesn't want to wake up again. So it's basically fresh seed, and then give it periods of heat and cold, that you fluctuating temperatures over the winter, put it outside where it can get rained on, cold, warm, and everything in between. And that's the trick to germinate. But yeah, the seed that's a couple of years old seems to just want to stay dormant, but it's the freshest seed that works the best.
I've got questions for both of you, but I'll just stick to one. I would like to know, have you ever had any chickens escape into your crops, and have the crops coped with being attacked by quantities of chickens? Because I'm looking at egg production and ways to feed them without grain, basically.
I have kept chickens alongside. I think most of the crops would survive pecking, especially the larger ones where they can't reach the higher parts of the plant. I mean, they'll probably have a good go at them, but
if it was well managed, then
yeah, because a lot of them will grow really large and quite tall, then the higher parts of the plant should be okay.
Okay. Oh yeah, I'm just interested to know if it would come back again. So if you're rotating on a large scale, if you've got supplement food for them, because obviously the chickens that I know love kale. So I was just interested to know how they would cope with being kind of stripped in one place, as opposed to caterpillars, chickens doing the job. Yeah,
I think they were about, especially with perennial kale, it thrives on kind of pruning. So if the chickens were pruning it, as long as they didn't scalp it, completely, it would be able to bounce back.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. I'll find you another more.
So I wanted to ask something just briefly about I think Mandy, it's quite clear that there's biodiversity benefits from all of the flowering and the perennials they're doing. And what's not so clear maybe is Elki, what the cacti can provide in the environment. And you spoke a little bit about it as a pioneer species.
So yeah, so at the moment, obviously cactus is from dry lands or semi-dry, but obviously I saw this opportunity when I arrived to London, when I found this garden and I started working on it, seeing something for the future, and then I dedicated more time on this. Now I am eating my own cacti. 2 years ago it was not possible because I was just propagating. But now I'm cooking for the community, sometimes for the volunteers in the center. it might not happen in 5 years, possibly not 10 years, but when it happens, that it will be useful, then we're gonna be like, the problem is gonna be up here. And I'm just trying to see how all the possibilities on the cacti to propagate on this climate, or even further up in Glasgow, or as far as north as I can, because the climate is moving towards north. There's some growers of wines inside of France, and they changing the crop to cactus because they just can't hold on. It's too expensive to grow wine, too risky, and they just decided to go into cactus because it's more profitable.
Do you know a way of processing cactus on a larger scale for animal consumption? Because on every farm, there's a space for cactus without even thinking about it. I can already tell you this, everyone's got a dead space they don't touch, where
Yeah.
the sun's at the back of a barn, where if there's 5 square meters, they could start their own like plot for, I mean, that experiment that you're doing could be multiplied so quickly, so easily. It's like I said, I've got so many questions for both of you. It's really been exciting to hear the whole thing. But I'm just like, do you have understanding on how it can be like made animal consumable in a,
Is as you ate it, just like that.
so
just,
at this
just-
point manual?
just very manual.
Because-
There are machines in the market and that are in the Mediterranean, Middle East, Mexico,
Okay.
just to get all the pads through a processor, and it makes a mix. And if you can mix it with other supplements, you can create or grow the protein within hours to make it more protein. But also you can give it the animals just like that, and
Okay.
your water consumption will be less as an average because they will drink less water.
Mhm. Oh, yeah. So if you had one machine then for a community, the
Uh-huh.
farmers could, either it's mobile, so it's just,
Yeah.
my head's exploding
Yeah.
at the possibilities on both
Yeah, you
fronts.
just put wheels on the machine,
Mhm.
and yeah, that's happening in the Mediterranean because they just have no water.
We're going to have to draw it to a close now, guys, but thank you so much to Elki and Mandy for coming here today. I'm sure you'll agree it's been a really interesting, thought-provoking session. You know, I sort of knew what they were going to talk to, but there's likewise so many ideas have come up about, you know, trying to address what do we do when the climate's changing? How do we forecast that in the next decade, or what are the solutions? And I think there's so many promising solutions in what they're doing, coming at it from 2 very different angles. So yeah, big thanks to both our speakers, please.